Secretary of Treasury.
Secretary of Treasury.
Deals with money.
Deals with money.
Secretary. Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Civics EOC Academy, where today we are going to continue looking outside of the United States as we examine U.S. foreign policy. Now, last time we looked at different systems and forms of governments that countries have used around the world, including the United States. So go back to our channel after this and check that out if you haven't already. So as our benchmark says, you are first and foremost going to have to know the difference between what is U.S. domestic and foreign policy. Now, foreign policy means anything that takes place outside of the United States, and domestic are the issues that exist inside America. Foreign affairs includes diplomacy, which is developing relationships with other countries, international trade, especially selling U.S. goods around the world, and of course, our military's international interactions with foreign nations. So, domestic issues include education, the economy, and the always important issue of unemployment for those who can't find jobs. The cost and access to healthcare is a major domestic issue, and crime, another example of a domestic concern. Now, you already know who is involved in dealing with domestic issues. As you've learned this year, it is the job of the U.S. Congress, who pass laws, the president, who enforces and influences laws, the courts or the judicial branch, who determine if our laws are fair and how we'll be treated by them, and state governments who also make, enforce, and judge their own laws in our system of what is called federalism. The government's plan for dealing with issues, both foreign and domestic, are known as policies. A policy is a plan for dealing with issues. And examples of domestic policies would be No Child Left Behind. That's George Bush's attempt to make sure that states were providing a solid education for its kids. Unemployment benefits for those who can't find a job is an example of a domestic policy. Medicare, which is free health care for the elderly, as well as Medicaid, free health care for the poor. Federal agents such as the FBI work with state police to fight crime. And these are all examples of domestic policies. But a lot of what the American government deals with are issues that take place outside of America. And this is the responsibility of two branches, the president with the executive branch, as well as the U.S. Congress or the legislative branch. So what is the president's role in foreign policy? The president signs treaties with other countries, they appoint ambassadors, they appoint the secretary of the state, they serve as commander-in-chief or the head of the military, and they have a role that we discussed known as a chief diplomat, which means they develop relationships with other countries. Meanwhile, Congress plays a large role in developing foreign policy as well. Both houses of Congress have committees dedicated to foreign affairs. As hopefully you remember, the president has to work with Congress, especially the Senate, as they are the ones responsible for approving or confirming treaties. They also confirm the Secretary of State and ambassadors, and it's also Congress, not the president, who have the power to declare war. Finally, it's members of Congress that must vote to approve the money that will be spent by the State Department, the military, and the executive branch in carrying out foreign affairs. So what are the goals of foreign policy? Well, national security, keeping America safe from other countries, is definitely the number one goal. And while sometimes it might not seem that way because America gets into a lot of fights, it's the goal of the American government to try to keep peace around the world. Another goal of U.S. foreign policy is to spread democracy around the world. There are still a lot of countries ruled by harsh governments that deny citizens' rights, and the U.S. government tries to influence these countries to give up some of those powers and hand them over to the people. Of course, America is always looking out for its economic interests, and it's the job of the U.S. government to promote trade with other countries. The United States also gives the largest amount of aid to foreign countries of any country in the world. So let's look closer at who helps the president and Congress in carrying out these goals. The Secretary of State is a member of the president's cabinet, and they are the chief advisor to the president on foreign affairs. It's their job to go out into the world and represent America to foreign countries. They play a crucial role in developing friendships known as alliances, and they meet with heads of foreign nations to serve the United States' interests around the world. Here is the current Secretary of State under President Obama, John Kerry, a former senator who ran for president against George W. Bush in 2004. Kerry took over for Hillary Clinton, herself running for president, so you can tell this is a very high-profile position. In fact, 6 former presidents served as Secretary of State before they became the president. Now, Secretary of State Kerry played a huge role recently in negotiating an agreement with Iran to stop them from building nuclear weapons. And here you could see Kerry meeting with the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. The Secretary of State is the head of the Department of State. It's usually called the State Department, which is responsible for foreign relations. In addition to the Secretary of State, the State Department includes thousands and tens of thousands of advisors and employees, including ambassadors and embassy staff. The main job of the State Department is called diplomacy. Diplomacy means building relationships with other countries. And the people whose job this is are known as diplomats. The U.S. currently has diplomatic relationships with over 180 countries. The president appoints chief diplomats known as ambassadors to go and live in these countries and represent the United States. The ambassadors are in charge of U.S. embassies, which are like our headquarters in other countries. In addition to building relationships, embassies are where Americans who are traveling in those countries can go and get assistance, and embassies provide millions of visas every year for foreigners to visit the United States. Again, these are all part of the U.S. State Department. To be an ambassador is a pretty high-profile position. As here we see President John F. Kennedy with his dad, and his dad was ambassador to Great Britain leading up to World War II. And below, we see President Kennedy's daughter is currently the ambassador to Japan. Ambassadors can help play a role in creating treaties. A treaty is a formal agreement between 2 or more countries, and treaties are signed by the president but must be confirmed by a 2/3 vote in the Senate, as stated in the U.S. Constitution. Here we see the president signing a treaty with the president of Russia, and the Senate approving a nuclear treaty. Probably the best-known treaties are peace treaties signed to end a war, but treaties can range from trade to security to the environment. 2 treaties that might appear on your test are NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, in which all 3 countries agree to trade without taxing each other. NATO really demonstrates the goal of establishing what are known as alliances. Alliances are agreements to work together between different parties, and your allies are your friends. NATO is a security alliance between the United States, Canada, and many European countries to protect each other in case of an attack. This treaty states that if one member of the alliance is attacked, all the other members must come to their defense. Another way the U.S. builds relationships and promotes peace is through foreign aid. As you see here, the United States gave away $35 billion worth of aid in 2013. The top 5 countries receiving aid, Israel, Afghanistan, Egypt, Pakistan, and Iraq, are all located in the Middle East, which speaks to the instability of this region right now. Although we have added to that instability with our recent wars against Afghanistan and Iraq, which is something we'll talk about in an upcoming video. In this graph, you can see the 2015 request by the executive branch for foreign aid, and some of the reasons for the aid are listed, including food and disease, as well as stabilization and conflict, and just being good, as we see here in Afghanistan. The U.S. also has an agency known as USAID, or the Agency for International Development, which provides food and water and medical care and just basic supplies. And as you can see, they have provided a lot of aid in Africa, South America, Asia, and again, here in the Middle East. Now, what does the United States do as a deterrent or a punishment for countries that we are having problems with? Well, one option is an economic deterrent known as sanctions. Sanctions are when the United States puts bans on trading with countries or other financial restrictions. Here is a recent map of countries with U.S. sanctions in place. We see Cuba, Iran, Sudan, North Korea, and Myanmar with the most serious sanctions put on them. And you can see how sanctions can affect a country by looking at Cuba's streets filled with cars built from the 1950s. Most sanctions don't last for that long or are that severe. Here is a cartoon poking fun at sanctions recently put on Russia for sending troops into neighboring Ukraine. They don't look very strong there. Of course, if sanctions don't work, the last step is using military force. We are going to look at an overview of U.S. military conflicts in an upcoming video, and this is obviously the most serious form of foreign policy that our government can undertake. Again, it's up to Congress to declare war, and the president can use force as he is the commander-in-chief of the military. Now, foreign policy can definitely impact domestic policy. 9/11 is a prime example. While this attack did take place inside America, the foreign actors involved in this tragic event and the foreign policy undertaken in the war on terror ever since has made America a place much more focused on internal security. The Cold War, which we'll be looking at soon, had a similar effect on domestic policy. America's fear of communism led the American government to investigate its own citizens as a worldwide conflict impacted the domestic situation. In fact, there's a great new movie out called Trumbo that demonstrates this paranoia that the government had about communism coming into America. Finally, global warming, a worldwide issue, has impacted our domestic policies to do our part in this serious issue. So as you can see, foreign policy and domestic policy, while two separate areas of focus for the U.S. government, will continue to influence one another into the future. And that's it for our foreign policy. Up next, we're going to look at international organizations, but before we do, let's review. Education. Is it a domestic or a foreign policy? Well, that's domestic because that happens here. Treaties. Domestic or foreign policy? Foreign. Which branch of the U.S. government does not deal with foreign policy? Remember the president, Congress, so that leaves out the judicial branch. What is the president's role in foreign policy? We mentioned several things. The president signs treaties, appoints ambassadors, appoints the Secretary of State, serves as the commander-in-chief, and is the chief diplomat for the country. What is Congress's role in foreign policy? Okay, Congress, in this case it's Senate, they confirm treaties, they confirm ambassadors and Secretary of State appointments. It's Congress that declares war, and it's Congress that provides the money for all of the foreign policy. What is the name for a formal agreement between two or more countries? Remember, we gave you a couple examples, NATO and NAFTA. That is a treaty. What is the military alliance between the US, Canada, and many European countries called? I kind of just gave that one away. It is NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. What is the economic deterrent of blocking trade with a foreign country called? We just went over that one. It is a sanction. And that is it. I want to thank you guys for watching. Up next, we're going to continue our search outside of America, looking at international organizations, so be sure to subscribe. And just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint and lesson plans, activities, and worksheets are all available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just search for Mr. Raymond's Civics EOC Academy. Again, thanks for watching.